Mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Funny thing happens when people move. It turns out their money moves with them.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
how that works?
And I'm a bit confounded by this data from my e-listings. This data that's tracking the migration of money, specifically tax returns, IRS data. Because I understand from Governor Jellybelly that Illinois is a state that's growing.
Right. Even though we lost a congressional seat, we're growing by leaps and bounds, Dan. Things are on the up and up.
Well, that's where I get a bit perplexed because according to this data, year over year, so this would be 21 to 22, Illinois lost $141.7 million in net income tax income, personal income tax income. They lost Illinois lost $141 million. So how could a growing state attracting the best and the brightest and bringing industry that's generating jobs and cash be losing on its personal income tax returns? Interestingly, too, 141 million. New York was second in gross terms, 299.6 million, and California number one, 343 million. That's about proportional. So New York's about twice as big as Illinois. California's about 3 times as big. So basically, New York, Illinois, California are the big losers, with New Jersey and Massachusetts not behind. Gosh, not far behind. I wonder if there's
What they have in common.
Yeah, what is there? Is there anything that links these states from the
According
West Coast to the East Coast?
Yeah, National Review, 319,000 Americans moved to the Sunshine State last year.
Yeah,
The
and
largest in-migration story of any state.
and correspondingly, now this makes sense. Largest in migration, Florida. They also saw the largest increase in personal income tax receipts, plus 12.4 billion.
Oh, that's nice.
So Illinois is down 141 million, but we're better than Florida, and Florida's up 12.4 billion because people want to live there. It's strange to try to match up Jelly Belly's rhetoric with reality. By the way, one of the reasons they're moving was nicely illustrated in this latest deal he cut with AFSCME, state workers. Listen to this, private sector chumps. The contract that J.B. Pritzker just, quote-unquote, negotiated.
You didn't negotiate anything.
Gives, it's a 4-year deal, covers 35,000 state workers, AFSCME, federal, state, county. 35,000 public sector workers, 19.2% raises.
Oh, that's nice.
That's more than the Teamsters are getting for tenure drivers in their new deal with UPS, for example.
Well, that's a sweetheart deal for anybody.
That's also only the increase in AFSCME base pay. It's just the increase in the base pay. They also get a $1,200 stipend for existing. The contract will cost $625 million over 4 years. The raises are 61% higher than the previous deal that they were operating under. Also, you'll love this, private sector chumps. Pay attention. The health insurance plans.
Oh boy.
The four-year contract.
Yeah.
Year 1, 0 increase in premiums. Year 2, a $10 a month increase. Year 3, a $8 a month increase. So over 4 years, it's $26 a month increase. And if healthcare costs would rise at a more rapid rate than that, guess who you think? Guess who will make up the difference? Do you think? Yeah,
The taxpayers.
right. Of course. And by the way, that also those ballooning salaries and benefits also translate into future growth in our unfunded public sector pension liabilities. But hey, what's
But,
another, few, 10, 20, 50 billion?
well, they want to make sure everything runs smoothly for the Democratic convention next August.
I can't figure out which I like better, the ASME contract or this new RIP medical debt plan that Mayor Eric Adams, who is the symbol of black masculinity in the Western world, according to him.
According to him, right.
He is the symbol of the black masculinity in America. He is. You know how we know? He said so. Just like KJP is a historic person.
Yeah.
We know this because they tell us. And you're supposed to
Greatest
just accept
soundbites
it.
ever. Yes. Uh-huh.
The city's health department, New York City, entered into an agreement with a nonprofit to acquire patients' debts from hospitals at a fraction of the value and paid off with private donations raised, as well as public funding. Those who qualify must earn less than 4 times the federal poverty level and have debt that exceeds 5% of annual income. Interesting. We're sort of getting to universal basic income through the back door because they can't quite sell it through the front door. You don't need to say we're just going to give everybody 75 grand of your money when you can eliminate their medical debt and with the help of the public, where you can eliminate their student debt with the help of the public, where you can confer all of these benefits and allowances with the help of the public. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by Christopher Whalen, again, investment banker, chairman of Whalen Global Advisors, author of Forward Men, From Inspiration to Enterprise, and editor for the Institutional Risk Analyst. Christopher Whalen, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
So, which do you think is the more compelling policy that maybe should be scaled to other big cities? That RIP medical debt program in your fair city, or like these generous contracts for state workers in places like Illinois?
Well, we have generous contracts for state workers in New York, too.
It's good. They're not mutually exclusive. Very good.
Yeah. No. Well, the medical thing is interesting. It's new. But, policies like this are only going to last so long. As you noted, the people are going south. And eventually, New York and Chicago are going to look like Detroit. So, on the other hand, the people going to Florida are looking for services that they're not going to receive. And they will demand services, and the state of Florida eventually is going to have an income tax.
Bite your tongue, sir.
So? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dan doesn't want to hear that.
Well,
listen, you go to a state with no services, and I mean no services at all compared to the north. I think people are going to find it rather shocking. But there you go. It's called limited government.
I don't know. Well, yeah. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, some people may, and other people may realize that they were paying for services they never actually utilized, and that actually weren't provided that effectively. I mean, I'm in Southwest Florida, and I don't notice any service lapse in terms of my lived experience between Naples and Chicago, for example. Hardly.
There you go. Well, half of Chicago's in Naples.
Exactly. So. That's why. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, good.
So here's the larger deal, though. You talk about sort of the trajectory of these big cities, and we've been talking about it. So what do you think, since this is really your bailiwick here, what do you think of this new idea that's taken hold and that you're seeing replicated around the country in proposal or discussion, which is to convert empty office buildings in city centers into some sort of residential housing deal or mixed-use deal?
No, you can't unless you want to ignore zoning and safety. You see, the typical office building has central, risers for utilities, and then the elevators are typically centrally located. If you start creating apartments on each floor, you've got to rip all that out, and you've got to redo it for individual habitation. And you might as well gut the whole building. Now, if you have a big steel structure building that's worth saving, yeah, you gut the whole thing and you rebuild it like it's a new building. Otherwise, you take the whole building down. But we've had this conversation in New York. You cannot convert commercial buildings to residential use. It just doesn't work.
And so, what happens? What do these are these just like areas of big cities where the moss grows and it's life after people?
No, no, it's going to look like a bad Charlton Heston movie. I mean, the Omega Man. And I think that you will eventually have redevelopment, but anything you do in these cities is expensive. If you look at the price per square foot of building a new building today in Chicago, with all the regulation and the corruption, then imagine if you had to start taking down those buildings on the Miracle Mile that were built for office use and turn them into resi, like the ones along the lake, right? That's going to be expensive. And
So,
the question is, what rents could you get for those buildings, especially if you fill them up with needy mid to lower income populations who really can't afford to live there? See, this is the fundamental question, Dan. Do we continue to subsidize low and mid income people, and I mean people who make over $100,000 a year, to live in places like New York, which are hideously expensive? I cannot make New York affordable. There's just no way to do it. Aside from the taxes and the costs, the layers of corruption in cities like this and the public sector union make it impossible.
yeah,
You got to start again. I
right.
think we should resettle people. We should be moving people out of New York City and resettling them in towns up and down the Hudson Valley that have transportation. Give them free access to the trains. Give them a decent place to live. That, I think, is the issue. Do you want to keep them in Queens or Brooklyn? No. Not the nice part of Brooklyn, I'm saying. I mean, they're not nice. Or the Bronx? No. You want to get those people out of there. So,
And despite the financial impossibility of these big blue states, and despite the decaying of America's big cities, everything's good. We're not going into recession, and the stock market, the Dow should hit $40,000, 40,000, I should say, by August 15th.
yeah. The patient is still feeling the effects of the joy juice from 2020 and 21, believe it or not. There's so much liquidity in the system that the Fed can't even make inflation go down. See, they would have to raise interest rates up to about 9 or 10% to force housing down because they pumped it up so much. The policy mess at the Fed is one of the least discussed and most important issues we face. But we don't talk about it. I personally think the city crisis that we're seeing forming in front of us, Dan and Amy, is an opportunity. See, what COVID did was it enabled us to go back to the pre-Henry Ford world where you lived in, basically you worked in the town where you lived. So once people got a taste of that, you can't take it back.
Mm-mm.
Once the families of working parents got a taste of that, they could actually see their parents for dinner, you're not going to take that away. So I think that's a remarkable thing. We've kind of wound the clock back to 1920, and it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out, but it won't be in cities. See, I have friends who went in and bought in New York City after COVID. I bought a house up in Westchester, and I think I'm far better off because our pricing is holding up.
Mm-hmm.
Pricing in the city is getting weak.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because people can read the newspaper and they listen and they talk to other residents. They talk to people on their condo board, and they understand what's coming at them, which is you have a totally unreasonable government. You have people in Albany who are completely crazy. We had a deal recently where the landlords would have finally gotten a way to renovate old apartments before they're leased again, so they're up to code, right? But the crazies in Albany said no. Even Governor Hochul is a relative moderate in this conversation, by the way, and Eric Adams. Mayor Adams is a moderate, guys.
Yeah.
You should take a look at the nut job communists we have in Albany.
Yeah, we're familiar with the profile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is your, our occupancy rate downtown right now? Is it 40, 42%? What is it in New York City and Manhattan?
If you go down below 34th Street, it's about that level. There's not much going on. You have a lot of tourists, you have a lot of residents roaming around, but there's enormous amounts of empty space. And obviously, we should redevelop it. If you want to revitalize New York City, then we should basically take a pencil, draw it across the island, and redevelop all of that stuff that's over 150, 200 years old. Okay? Tenements. These are buildings that are barely kept within code. They need to go. But the fight over the property, which is where the value is, supposedly, right, it would be monumental. So unless you use eminent domain to basically condemn all of it, and it needs to be condemned, I just don't know how you fix this. And then you go over to Brooklyn. There are parts of Brooklyn that ought to be burned down today. So same thing. The New York City looks like it did 100 years ago, except for the new buildings. The old buildings are still there.
I want to go
And
back. I want to go back to what you said about the Fed and the problems there that go under discussed. Well, what exactly are they? I mean, they sort of you do a decade of quantitative easing. They're going to stop buying, uh, stop adding to their portfolio, but
Right.
but then they sort of slow walk doing that, but now inflation is back down to 3% or a little over 3% year over year. So they say, I understand the sort of aggregate
Not
effect.
housing. Housing prices are going up.
Right, but I mean, in terms of the trajectory here on most goods and services, and you see the market reaction, and say, well, okay, well, so whatever you say the problem is with the Fed, I mean, is it a significant determining factor of how the upwardly mobile live their lives? I mean, because we don't care about lower middle income or lower income people. We only care about the upwardly mobile.
Well, look, the big lie in America, and this goes back 50 years, is that inflation is low. Inflation is not low. Inflation is how we keep this system from blowing up, giving people the illusion that wages and revenues are going up. But if you really look at it in real terms, we're kind of flatlined. And I think what the Fed did back in 2019 was go big. In other words, they bought lots more bonds than they had in the 10 years previously, Dan. And what that did was it distorted the bond market and the housing market to an enormous degree. But now Powell is afraid to unwind his little hedge fund because he knows that if he does that, the losses will be so large that the Fed will lose their independence. Congress will finally wake up and start shooting people. Powell should have lost his job 2 years ago, but we have no critical commentary in this country when it comes to economic policy. We're incapable of it. So the guys in Washington, both the Republicans and the Democrats, want to pretend everything's fine. They argue about taxes. I was just in D.C. last week with a bunch of conservatives talking about tax policy, and I looked at them all and I said, yeah, well, what about the approaching federal, restructuring of debt? Let's talk about something important, right? But nobody wants to talk about that. So we all pretend that everything's fine. I was just down in Avalon, New Jersey over the weekend. You know what the starting price for a beach house is in Avalon, New Jersey? $4 million.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me inflation is low. I used to go there when I was a kid, when I was going to Villanova. Measure the inflation over the last 40 years by looking at home prices in Avalon, New Jersey, or Stone Harbor, where Oprah likes to hang out.
So we're just going to continue muddling along like we are now in a stagflationary environment with nice home prices in the suburbs and exurbs until we can't.
Oh, it's going to even be more than that because the mobile, having had a taste of urban living post-COVID, are going to go back to the burbs, or they're going to go to Texas, God help us, while we're worried about global warming. Don't you love that? Everyone's moving to Texas and Florida.
Yeah, right, Florida. Yeah.
All of my friends in the mortgage industry in Plano are going to be cooked like boiled egg. We're just going to find them one morning, hard-boiled.
We have moved into the boiling period, according to the UN. That's right. Yeah.
Well, you know what the other dirty little secret is? All the mortgage execs come back up here for the summer. I won't mention any names.
There's nothing funnier than the U.S. economy. I got to tell you,
It's the greatest system on earth.
I know it. Christopher Whalen, investment banker, chairman of Whalen Global Advisors, author of Ford Men from Inspiration Enterprise, and editor For the institutional risk analysts, Chris, thanks as always.
Have a great day.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
When this is the sound of a crackling campfire on a cool evening.
TV news. It's a love-hate relationship. Well, let's be honest. More hate. We agree. That's why we're different. Salem News Channel has assembled the greatest collection of conservative minds all in one place. Home to Charlie Kirk, Hugh Hewitt, Eric Metaxas, and more. There's finally a place on TV for lovers of freedom like you. Watch anytime on any screen, free 24/7. Find what you're looking for at snc.tv. That's snc.tv. AM 560, The Answer.